السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. We mentioned that we would like to complete this kitab by the 25th of December, inshallah. So in order to complete it by the 25th of December, we need to have some double sessions. So inshallah, in today's lesson, we'll have a double session. So we'll have lesson 24 also, lesson 124 also, and lesson 125 also, based on the ikhtilaf of how you count the lessons. You know, there's difference of opinion. So which madhab you follow in counting the lessons. So after 4:30, if you need to go, then you can leave. And if you want to stay on for the next lesson, but when putting the notes, then they will be regarded as lesson 124 will be regarded will be for whatever is said until 4:30, and then lesson 125 will start after 4:30. So we'll have two lessons together. And if you need to leave after the first lesson, that is after 4:30, then you can leave after the first lesson and listen to the recording, inshallah. So we're having two lessons in one lesson, just so that we can finish on the 25th of December. We can complete this kitab by this year, inshallah. Ibn Hajar rahmallah says, وَإِنْ رَوَى عَنْ شَيْخٍ حَدِيثًا فَجَحَدَ الشَّيْخُ مَرْوِيَّهُ فَإِنْ كَانَ جَزْمًا كَأَنْ يَقُولَ كَذَبَ عَلَيَّ أو ما رويت هذا أو نحو ذلك فإن وقع منه ذلك رد ذلك الخبر لكذب واحد منهما لا بعينه ولا يكون ذلك قادحا في واحد منهما للتعارض أو كان جحده احتمالا كأن يقول ما أذكر هذا أو لا أعرفه قبل ذلك الحديث في الأصح لأن ذلك يحمل على نسيان الشيخ وقيل لا يقبله لأن الفرع تبع للأصل في إثبات الحديث بحيث إذا ثبت الأصل الحديث ثبتت رواية الفرع وكذلك ينبغي أن يكون فرعا عليه وتبعا له في التحقيق وهذا متعقب فإن عدالة الفرع تقتضي الصدق وعدم علم الأصل لا ينافيه فالمثبت مقدم على النافي وأما قياس ذلك بالشهادة ففاسد لأن شهادة الفرع لا تسمع مع القدرة على شهادة الأصل بخلاف الرواية فافترقا وفيه أي في هذا النوع صنف الدارقطني كتاب من حدث ونسي وفيه ما يدل على تقوية المذهب الصحيح لكون كثير منهم حدثوا بأحاديث فلما عرضت عليهم لم يتذكروها لكنهم لاعتمادهم على الرواة عنهم صاروا يروونها عن الذين رووها عنهم عن أنفسهم كحديث سهيل بن أبي صالح عن أبيه عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنهم مرفوعا في قصة الشاهد مع اليمين قال عبد العزيز بن محمد الدراوردي حدثني به ربيعة بن أبي عبد الرحمن عن سهيل فلقيت سهيلا فسألته عنه فلم يعرفه فقلت إن ربيعة حدثني عنك بهذا فكان سهيل بعد ذلك يقول حدثني ربيعة عني أني حدثته عن أبي به ونظائره كثيرة. In this chapter, Allama ibn Hajar rahmallah explains the ruling if there is a difference between the teacher and the student. A student is narrating from a particular sheikh, but the sheikh either denies that he narrated that narration or he expresses doubt. Since ahadith were not documented in the earlier times, it would happen that a reliable student narrates from a reliable sheikh, but the sheikh denies that he ever narrated that narration, or maybe he does not deny it, but he just forgot and he expresses doubt that did I narrate it or didn't, I can't remember narrating this. So an example of this is proven from the time of Sahaba radiyallahu anhum. In Sahih Muslim, it is narrated that the son of Abdurrahman ibn Auf, Abu Salama, he would narrate two narrations. Imam Muslim rahimahullah brings with his sanad that Abu Salama would narrate that Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, La adwa. So there is no such thing, and you know this here applies so much in today's times. There is no such things as a contingent. And thereafter he would say, La yuridu mumarridun ala musahhin, that a person who's sick should not come in front of a healthy person. So he would narrate it as two separate narrations. Thereafter, in Sahih Muslim, Abu Salma explains that initially Abu Huraira radiallahu anhu would narrate both narrations, but then he only began to narrate the one narration. So he says, كان أبو هريرة يحدثهما كلتيهما عن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. Abu Huraira radiallahu anhu would narrate both these narrations from the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم. ثم صمت أبو هريرة بعد ذلك عن قوله لا عدوى. But thereafter, Abu Huraira radiallahu anhu stopped narrating the first narration, لا عدوى, but he still continued with the second narration, لا يريد ممرض على مصح. So Harith ibn Abi Zabab, who was the cousin of Abu Huraira radiallahu anhu, he went up to Abu Huraira radiallahu anhu, he approached him and he said that كنت أسمعك يا أبا هريرة تحدثنا مع هذا الحديث حديثا آخر قد سكت عنه. He's saying that whenever you used to narrate this here previously, you would always first narrate something, another narration, la adwa. But now you are only narrating this second portion, you are no more narrating that first portion. كنت تقول قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم لا عدوى. You always would narrate it by saying لا عدوى. فأبى أبو هريرة رضي الله عنهم. So Abu Huraira radiallahu anhu, he denied that he even knew of this narration. And he said, no, it was always like this here. It was always, I used to only narrate this one portion. I never ever used to narrate that second portion. فما رآه الحارث في ذلك حتى غضب أبو هريرة. But Harith was so certain that Abu Huraira radiallahu anhu would narrate both, that he also he became angry on Abu Huraira radiallahu anhu became angry because he persisted. So this here shows that Imam Muslim rahimahullah is still narrating the narration. So the student is very, very certain that the Sheikh said it, but the Sheikh he denies it either very emphatically or maybe he just doubts on it. So Ibn Hajar rahimahullah discusses the ruling of these narrations where the teacher denies narrating. Here in Nuzha an-Naḍar, he divides it into two categories. The first category is the Sheikh is denying with absolute conviction that he did not narrate. So he's 100% certain and he's saying that I didn't ever narrate this narration. And the second scenario is that the Sheikh is doubtful on whether he narrated it or not. He just says that I cannot remember narrating it. I don't recall ever saying it. So there are two different rulings which Ibn Hajar rahmallah gives for both these scenarios. In the first scenario, where the Sheikh is absolutely certain and he is totally convinced that he did not narrate it, the narration will be rejected. But Ibn Hajar clarifies that even though the narration is being rejected, it will not affect the integrity of either the Sheikh or of the student. Both of them will still be regarded as thiqah. So one of them is mistaken, but since we cannot identify who is the one that is mistaken, who is the one that is incorrect, we cannot dismiss either of them. So this is with regards to the first, and we'll discuss the ruling when the Sheikh is doubtful. It is a different ruling. So Ibn Hajar rahmallah says, فَإِنْ رَوَى عَنْ شَيْخٍ. Now here in Nuzha an-Naḍar, he did not qualify it. He just mentioned that if a person is to narrate from a Sheikh, but this here refers to a reliable narrator narrating from a reliable Sheikh. A thiqatun an thiqatin. It must be that a reliable student is coming and the Sheikh also is reliable. So both of them have good memories because Dabt is included under thiqah. So both of them have good memories. It's a student who's trustworthy with a good memory, narrating from a Sheikh who is trustworthy with a good memory. Sheikh Ibrahim Lahim, he says, وَالْكَلَامُ كُلُّهُ مَعَ ثِقَةِ التَّلْمِيذِ وَثُبُوتِ عَدَالَتِهِ أما مع عدمها أو الشك فيها فهو من باب آخر. If the student himself is known that he didn't have a good memory or is known that he was weak, then this here does not relate to this chapter. Rather, that would then be further used to establish يكون دليلا على تأكيد انتفاء الثقة عنه بنفي الشيخ لما يرويه عنه. Then if one of them is not authentic, so either the student or the Sheikh is not authentic, and you have a trustworthy and a reliable Sheikh or student who is affirming the narration, then this would add additional proof. It will be additional proof to prove that this person here has a weak memory. So if the student has a good memory and the sheikh doesn't have a good memory, and the student is saying that you did narrate it and the sheikh is saying, no, I didn't narrate it, then because the student has a good memory, it will we'll use it to say, look, this sheikh couldn't remember, but the student could remember. So this is additional proof to show us and to prove to us that the sheikh is weak. Or if it is the other way around, maybe the sheikh is the one who is reliable and the student is not reliable. So if this here will be now used to prove that the student is falsely attributing to the sheikh. So therefore this here is very specific to those cases where both the student and the teacher are reliable. If one of them is not reliable, وهو من الوسائل التي استخدمها النقاد لكشف حال الراوي. They would, the nuqad of hadith would use this here to prove and to understand the status of a narrator. That if there are other, or leave alone even the sheikh, maybe other reliable students, maybe his colleagues are denying it. So leave alone the sheikh, if this person, you have doubt on his memory, and all his colleagues are saying, no, the sheikh did not narrate this, and he is the only one who is saying that he narrated it, then that will be used to prove that this here is actually shadh, and it could be used to weaken the narrator. So a reliable student is narrating from a reliable teacher. He's narrating a hadith, فَجَحَدَ الشَّيْخُ مَرْوِيَّهُ. So, but the sheikh is denying the narration. Now here Ibn Hajar rahmallah adds additional word, and it says, فَإِنْ كَانَ جَزْمًا كَأَيْ يَقُولْ كَذَبَ عَلَيَّ. That is citing this, these words, كَذَبَ عَلَيَّ, to show that this will also form under this category. So كَذَبَ عَلَيَّ is not just being firm and saying that he did not narrate it. Rather, he's saying that the student is lying. So he's putting it into one category. كَذَبَ عَلَيَّ is putting it under this category. He's citing it as an example, and in the next example he's saying مَا رَوَيْتُ هَذَا. So when the sheikh says that the person is lying, and when the sheikh is just certain that he did not narrate it, in both cases, Ibn Hajar here in Nuzha an-Naḍar, he is giving the same ruling. However, in Fath al-Bari, he made a separate category for those instances where a teacher accuses the narrator of lying, and between those cases where he merely denies. So he put it into two separate groups, into two separate categories, and we will explain about that shortly. So the first example is where the sheikh is clearly saying that the student is lying against me, he's fabricating against me, he's just making it up. So he's he's accusing the student. And the second is not accusing the student, rather he is talking about himself. He's saying that مَا رَوَيْتُ هَذَا, I am certain that I did not narrate this here. وَنَحْوَ ذَلِكَ. Or he used similar words of confidence, that he says لَيْسَ هَذَا مِنْ حَدِيثِ, this is not my ahadith. مَا رَوَيْتُ لَهُ هَذَا, I did not narrate this narration to him. So maybe he agrees that he did narrate it, but he's saying مَا رَوَيْتُ لَهُ هَذَا. Or maybe he just says مَا رَوَيْتُ هَذَا, مَا رَوَيْتُ هَذَا قَطُّ, I never ever narrated this. So he's totally confident, and he is vehemently saying that I did not narrating it. Now, instead of passing the ruling and mentioning, Ibn Hajar rahmallah goes in a circle here, and he mentions فَإِنْ وَقَعَ مِنْهُ ذَلِكَ, that if this here happens. So Allama Qasim rahmallah says هَذَا حَشْوٌ لَا مَحَلَّ لَهُ. He's just putting now unnecessary words here in between in the text. So in contrast to his normal habit, Allama al-Qani, he normally always tries to respond to Allama Qasim. But here, he agreed with Allama Qasim. It is no reason for Ibn Hajar rahmallah to mention these words again. فَإِنْ وَقَعَ مِنْهُ ذَلِكَ. Rather, he can go straight to his point and mention the ruling. So he says, لِإِغْنَاءِ قَوْلِهِ فَإِنْ كَانَ جَزْمًا عَنْهُ أَيْضًا وَهُوَ بَيِّنٌ. Mullah Ali Qari rahmallah, he offers the excuse that maybe he wants to stress that it's definite that the sheikh was absolutely positive. He knew for sure that he did not narrate it. So therefore, فَإِنْ وَقَعَ مِنْهُ ذَلِكَ, if you are sure that the sheikh he was firm that he did not narrate it, then the ruling will be رُدَّ ذَلِكَ الْخَبْرِ, that the narration will be then rejected. So Mullah Ali Qari rahmallah, he explains that this Ibn Hajar rahmallah is actually getting it from his Imam, that this is actually related from Imam Shafi'i rahimahullah. With regards to the view of Imam Shafi'i rahimahullah, we refer to his Musnad. So he brings a narration there in his Musnad where he says that Ibn Uyayna told him, and he's narrating from Amr, who's narrating from Abi Ma'bad. So Amr and Abi Ma'bad, just remember those two names because it's the same standard of Bukhari and Muslim. And then they narrating, then Abu Ma'bad is narrating from Ibn Abbas radiallahu an, that how would I know that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam salah is completed? Because in those times there were no microphones, so how would we know? So the Sahaba radiallahu anhum would all then start to recite takbir and make the azkar after salah. كنت أعرف قضاء صلاة رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم بالتكبير. So Abu Ma'bad is the one who Amr is quoting it from. But Amr ibn Dinar, he says that then I mentioned it later to Abu Ma'bad, and he with absolute conviction, he said, Lam uhaddithkahu. I never ever told you this narration. But Amr ibn Dinar, he was absolutely certain as well. So he said, Qad haddathtanihi. Most definitely you narrated it to me. So then Imam Shafi'i rahmallah said, كأنه نسيه بعدما حدثه إياه. It is as if he forgot about it after narrating it. So this narration, Imam Muslim rahmallah is also narrated it. He narrated from Zuhair ibn Harb, who narrates from Sufyan ibn Uyayna, and then the same sanad, Amr ibn Dinar. So now this is how it's going. It's going, حدثنا سفيان بن عيينة عن عمرو قال أخبرني بذا أبو معبد ثم أنكره بعده عن ابن عباس قال كنا نعرف انقضاء رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم بالتكبير. That is how he narrates it first. And then he brings the next narration, which again goes via Amr ibn Dinar from Abu Ma'bad. And he mentions that ما كنا نعرف انقضاء صلاة رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إلا بالتكبير. فقال عمرو فذكرت ذلك لأبي معبد فأنكره وقال لم أحدثك بهذا. But قال عمرو قد أخبرنيه قبل ذلك. That most definitely he did tell me this narration. So the point to note here is that in spite of the teacher rejecting this narration and claiming that he did not narrate it, Imam Muslim rahmallah still brought this narration. In fact, Imam Bukhari rahmallah also narrated this narration. It comes in Sahih al-Bukhari on page 168. So there too, he also is the one who narrated it. So Imam Bukhari and Imam Muslim narrated this, but the teacher rejected it and the student narrated it. And what did Ibn Hajar rahmallah said? رُدَّ ذَلِكَ الْحَدِيث. That the hadith will be rejected, but Imam Bukhari and Imam Muslim are narrating it. So we'll come back to this point, and we will also explain what Ibn Hajar rahmallah mentioned about it in Fathul Bari. So Ibn Hajar is claiming that the narration will be rejected, and he gets this from Ibn Salah rahimahullah, because Allama Ibn Salah rahimahullah also said that the narration will be rejected. فالمختار أنه إن كان جازما بنفيه بأن قال ما رويته أو كذب علي أو نحو ذلك فقد تعارض الجزمان والجاحد هو الأصل. So thereafter what did Allama Ibn Salah said? فوجب رد حديث فرعه ذلك. So he's also mentioning that the narration will be rejected. But this is in contrast to Allama Khatib rahimahullah. Because Allama Khatib rahimahullah, who is the source for Ibn Salah, Ibn Salah rahimahullah generally gets all his points in these chapters from Allama Khatib. He was using Kifaya as his base for Mutala'ah when teaching these chapters. So when you go to Al-Kifaya of Allama Khatib quotes his teacher, Allama Baqillani rahimahullah, that he said that you merely make tawakkuf. So he's not saying that you reject the narration. فَأَمَّا قَوْلُهُ أَنَا أَعْلَمُ أَنِّي مَا حَدَّثْتُهُ فَقَدْ كَذِبَ وَلَيْسَ جَرْحُ شَيْخٍ لَهُ أَوْلَى مِنْ قَبُولِ جَرْحِ لِشَيْخِهِ فَيَجِبُ إِيقَافُ الْعَمْلِ بِهَذَا الْخَبَرِ. So this is what he is saying. He's saying that you will just make tawakkuf. The meaning of tawakkuf is that you are not accepting the narration, but you are also not rejecting the narration. So you are not accepting the narration, or you're not rejecting the narration. You are just remaining in the middle. But Ibn Hajar and Allama Ibn Salah rahimahullah, both of them are claiming that you will reject the narration. So there is a difference between the two rulings. When you reject a narration, it means that the narration now is valueless. There is no strength in this narration at all. That's the meaning of reject. It's a rejected narration. You cannot use this narration. It has no benefit. It has no value. when you make tawaqquf, then although at the present moment, whether you are outright rejecting the narration or whether you are simply making a tawaqquf, the result is the same, that you are not practicing upon the narration. So at the present moment, it makes no difference. But the strength of both differs, and therefore it could have an impact. If you are making tawaqquf, the moment you find a reason that you could use to accept the narration, you would be able to accept the narration. For example, say maybe you find a mutaba'ah with a weak chain. So you find another weak chain which links to another student who is also narrating that same narration from the same sheikh. So you have this one student who is thiqa narrating from the sheikh who is thiqa, and the sheikh is saying, I didn't narrate it. Then you have a weak sanad, and you have a student who is saying, who is also narrating that hadith. Then that could help in preferring the statement of the student, and therefore we will say that with this mutaba'ah, now we can accept this narration. This is if you are making tawaqquf, you can use that as a reason to accept the narration. But if you are making rad, if you are rejecting the narration, then a weak mutaba'ah is not going to add any value. You still won't be able to accept the narration. So Hanafis also follow the same ruling of saying that you will not practice upon the narration at present. But look, Sheikh Ala al-Bukhari, he also phrased it similar to how Alama Khatib rahimahullah phrased it. So he says that أما إن أنكر المروي عنه إنكار جاحد مكذب بأن قال ما رويت لك هذا الحديث قط أو كذبت علي، أو أنكره إنكار متوقف بأن قال لا أذكر أني رويت لك هذا الحديث أو لا أعرفه ونحو ذلك، ففي الوجه الأول يسقط العمل به. So he's not saying that you will reject it. He's saying that you will just not practice upon it. This is how he is mentioning it. Then later on in the text he says وذكر في القواطع إذا جحد المروي عنه وكذب بالحديث سقط الحديث. So he's mentioning that they didn't say سقط العمل به. Rather, he says that سقط الحديث, the hadith loses its value. So, what Ala al-Bukhari mentions, he says, وَأَقُولْ يَجُوزُ أَلَّا يَسْقُطْ, that when you're saying that the hadith loses its value, probably it could be that the hadith does not lose its value. So therefore, it is better to phrase it like how Alama Khatib rahimullah, etc. phrase it, rather than saying that you will reject the narration, rather say, and you will understand this from examples which are coming ahead as well. Or if you want to understand it now, then just understand it from what we quoted now. Imam Bukhari and Imam Muslim accepted it. So therefore, in mentioning the ruling, we all mention the ruling same like what Ibn Hajar is mentioning it. Rather, we will mention the ruling as saying that you will make tawaqquf and you will look at external factors. That is how we will mention the ruling of this year. If you have a sheikh who is very strongly saying that he did not narrate the narration, then we will make tawaqquf on the narration, and then we will look at external factors. That is the correct way of looking at it. Nevertheless, Hafiz ibn Hajar rahmallah mentions that we will reject the narration. So then he mentions the reason why we will reject the narration. He says, لِكَذْبِ وَاحِدٍ مِّنْهُمَا, definitely one of them is lying. That either the sheikh is lying because he's saying that I did not narrate it, or the student is lying because he is narrating it from the sheikh. So both of them cannot be correct. One of them is definitely lying. The sheikh is clearly saying that he did not narrate, and the student is clearly saying that the sheikh did narrate. So one of them is definitely speaking a lie. Alama Qasim rahmallah, he explains the siyam. He says, يعني لكذب الأصل في قوله كذب علي وما رويته. So when the sheikh is saying this here, then he could be lying. إن كان الفرع صادقا في الواقع, he will be lying if the student is correct. Maybe the sheikh did narrate it, and the sheikh is still saying this here that ما رويته, so he is lying. Or maybe this student is lying. ولكذب الفرع في الرواية إن كان الأصل صادقا في قوله كذب علي أو ما رويتم. But because they are not intentionally lying, the integrity and adala will not be impacted. So ولا يثبت بذلك تعمد كذب واحد منهما بعينه حتى يكون قادحا في عدالته إذ كل منهما عدل ثقة وقد كذب كل Alama Laqani rahmallah is saying this here that we cannot use one of the siyam to prove that one of them would lose their integrity, because we don't know who it is. Like Ibn Hajar is saying, لا بعينه, We don't know who exactly is the one that is lying. So one of them is definitely lying, and there is no possibility to know who is the liar. ولا يكون ذلك قادحا في واحد منهما للتعارض. So on the one hand, the honest student is absolutely convinced that the teacher mentioned that narration to him, but on the other hand, the honest sheikh is absolutely convinced that he did not say it. So two strong narrators are contradicting each other, and both are completely convinced that he is correct. Therefore, it will not impact the integrity of either of them, and both will still be regarded as adil. Mullah al-Qari rahmallah attends to an objection which could be raised here, that you're saying that one of them is lying. So he's saying that فَإِنْ قِيلَ كَذْبَ الشَّيْخ مُسْتَلْزِمٌ لِصِحَّةِ الْحَدِيثِ لَا لِرَدِّهِ. If the sheikh is lying, because you're saying one of them could be lying, so if the sheikh is lying, then it would mean that you will have to accept the narration, and you cannot then reject the narration. فإنه إذا كان الشيخ كاذبا في قوله كذب علي فكان التلميذ صادقا فيكون الحديث صحيحا. So in that case, the narration will be sahih if the sheikh is lying. أجيب بأن سلمنا ذلك لكنه إذا ظهر منه الكذب. We need to know with absolute conviction that the sheikh is the one who is lying. Then we can say that the narration will be accepted. As long as we don't have absolute conviction, if we don't know with certainty who is the one that is lying, we cannot practice upon the narration. So this here is the first category. For this, Ibn Hajar rahmallah mentioned that the narration cannot be accepted. However, we mentioned that in Fathul Bari, Hafidh Ibn Hajar rahmallah made a different division for this. So let us look firstly at what his the closest student to him towards the end of his life, Allama Sakhawi rahimahullah, had to say. Allama Sakhawi rahimahullah mentioned in Fathul Mughith, كل هذا إذا صرح بالتكذيب فإن جزم بالرد بدون تصريح بقوله ما رويت هذا أو ما حدثت به قط أو أنا عالم أنني ما حدثتك أو لم أحدثك فقد صوب ابن الصلاة تبعا للخطيب وغيره بينهما أيضا وهو الذي مشى عليه شيخنا في توضيح النخبة. That here in Nuzha an-Naḍar, Ibn Hajar rahmallah is just following Allama Ibn Salah, who in turn is following Allama Khatib rahmallah. That they are saying it makes no difference whether the sheikh is accusing the student of lying or whether the sheikh is just very positive and very convinced that the student is lying, and he uses words as ma haddathtuka bihi qattu. So this is what Ibn Hajar rahmallah is mentioning in Nuzha an-Naḍar, and he's following Allama Ibn Salah. Both of them are in the same category. However, Allama Sakhawi rahmallah then explains that Ibn Hajar rahmallah mentioned a different view in Fathul Bari. He's saying that in Fathul Bari, Ibn Hajar rahmallah mentioned that inna al-rajih indahum al-muhaddithin al-qabul. That there is a difference. If the sheikh says that the student is lying, then we will reject the narration. However, if the sheikh does not with absolute certainty say that the sheikh is lying, he just mentions that I did not narrate this here, and he's positive that he did not narrate it, then he's saying that we could, that the muhaddithun, and the preferred view according to muhaddithun is that you will accept the narration. So that differs totally with what he mentions here in Nuzha an-Naḍar, isn't? In Fathul Bari, he's mentioning something totally contradictory to what he is mentioning. Yeah, in Fathul Bari, he's saying that you will accept it. Yeah, he just mentioned that you will reject the narration. رُدَّ ذَلِكَ الْخَبْرُ. And there he's saying, الراجح عندهم القبول. So to get the proper understanding, let us first refer and go back to Fathul Bari. So he says, وَلِأَهْلِ الْحَدِيثِ فِيهِ تَفْصِيل. So they're saying that the muhaddithun, they create a distinction here. قالوا إما يجزم برده أو لا. Either he is very convinced that he did not mention it or not. If he is very convinced that he did not mention this narration, if he never quoted this narration, فإما يصرح بتكذيب الراوي عنه أو لا. So now you can see he's creating a distinction. So he's saying that either the sheikh will say that the student is lying, or maybe he will just mention with certainty. So he's saying فَإِن لَمْ يَجْزَمْ بِالرَّدِّ كَأَنْ قَالَ لَا أَذْكُرُهُ. Then this here is the next masla which is coming. So we'll discuss that there. But he's saying وَإِن جَزَمَ وَصَرَّحَ بِالتَّكْذِيبِ فَهُوَ مُتَّفَقٌ عِنْدَهُمْ عَلَى رَدِّهِ. So let's get that one out of the way. That if he has to say that the student is lying, then everyone agrees that you will reject the narration. But now he mentions, وَإِن جَزَمَ بِالرَّدِّ, if he is just absolutely positive that he did not narrate it, but he's not accusing the student of lying. So it's already a half past, like I mentioned. Now we're going to be teaching lesson 125 so that we can complete the kitab before the end of the year. So if any of you want to leave, you can leave now and listen to the recording. Otherwise, we're still going to continue with the next lesson, with lesson 125. And also in the notes, now you must know that it's going to be now into two separate lessons. So he's saying, وَإِن جَزَمَ بِالرَّدِّ وَلَمْ يُصَرِّحْ بِالتَّكْذِيبِ فَالرَّاجِحْ عِنْدَهُمْ قُبُولُهُ. Can you see how he's mentioning there? It's absolutely different from what he mentioned here in Nuzha an-Naḍar. So he mentioned it with regards to the muhaddithun. Thereafter he mentions from the fuqaha. But here Nuzha an-Naḍar is a book on usul al-hadith. And therefore, you remember in the past, he also spoke about it with regards to Mustafid, etc. That it's chapters of usul al-fiqh. So here, very strictly, we are mentioning only that which is related to usul al-hadith. Therefore, he needs to tell us what the muhaddithin say, not what the fuqaha say. And also, he mentions وَأَمَّا الْفُقَهَا فَاخْتَلَفُوا. There's differences of opinion amongst them. So if you wanted to mention the view of fuqaha here, firstly, you would need to clarify that what he's mentioning is the view of fuqaha. Thereafter, you would need to clarify that there's differences among the fuqaha. So definitely what he's mentioning here in Nuzha needs to be the view of muhaddithin. But in Fath al-Bari, he's mentioning the total opposite view from a muhaddithin. So this also serves as a perfect example of where Ibn Hajar rahmallah mentions a principle in Nuzha. So he's mentioning something in a theory, but when the time of application comes, then he realized that we cannot rigidly follow the principle that he mentioned here in Nuzha an-Naḍar. Now just look at this case here. If he has to follow the principle of Nuzha, it will raise an objection against Imam al-Bukhari and Imam Muslim. Because Ibn Hajar is saying that if the Shaykh denies that he narrated it, then the narration will be rejected. But Imam Bukhari and Imam Muslim rahimullah, they are not only accepting the narration, they are regarding it as so authentic that they do not even hesitate to bring such a narration in their Sahih. And you know how they searched and they how they inspected the narration before they could put it in their Sahih. So they had no problem that although Abu Ma'bad is saying that he did not narrate it, they felt that it's fine, it can still be narrated, and therefore they put it in their Sahih. So therefore Ibn Hajar rahmallah had to adjust the principle, he had to adjust the ruling in Fath al-Bari. Now Allama Sakhawi rahmallah explains another reason why Ibn Hajar rahmallah had to bend the ruling. He says, وَلَعَلَّ تَصْحِيحَ هَذَا الْحَدِيث بِخُصُوصِهِ. He's saying that maybe this one particular narration we will have to say it is Sahih. Why? لِمُرَجِّحٍ اِقْتَضَاهُ. Because maybe they looked at some external factors and due to other reasons they could give preference to accepting this narration. تَحْسِينًا لِلظَّنِّ بِالشَّيْخَيْنِ. Now this statement of Allama Sakhawi is very important because this is the actual ruling. The actual ruling is that if you one day have to write or one day if you have to explain to someone what is the ruling if a sheikh narrates and thereafter the student claims that he narrates, but the sheikh, he is very positive that he did not narrate. So instead of saying that we will reject the narration, the way of explaining it is you say we will make tawaqquf, then we will search for external factors and we will see whether we could give preference to accepting the narration or to rejecting the narration. Therefore, we said that the way Allama Khatib and Allama Baqillani phrased it, that way will be more precise. We will say that you make tawaqquf and you look now for other reasons on whether you should accept the narration or reject the narration. We will not say that you will just reject the narration. If you're going to take Ibn Hajar's ruling here of Rudda Dhalika al-Khabru, then the statement of Allama Sakhawi that limurajjahin qatadahu, it falls away because he's saying that the narration is rejected. So now how can you will have to bring a sanad to prove it. You cannot now, no other external factor besides an authentic sanad will be able to strengthen it, and that authentic sanad has to be on par and has to fulfill the conditions of Imam Bukhari and Imam Muslim. So therefore, if you do not take this ruling which you are mentioning, that you make tawaqquf and look for external factors, the statement of Allama Sakhawi falls away. But Allama Sakhawi was a great muhaddith, and therefore we will have to give consideration to what he mentions. Furthermore, also, this is one of the rare places where Allama Sakhawi, who was still a young man when Ibn Hajar passed away, where he differs with his teacher. You know, normally, Allama Sakhawi always tries his level best to defend Ibn Hajar rahimahullah. He goes out of his way to bring interpretations for Ibn Hajar rahimahullah, etc. And you know that whole thing between Allama Suyuti and Allama Sakhawi rahimahullah, etc. This is not a place to discuss it. Nevertheless, this is one place where you can see that Allama Sakhawi is differing with his teacher. So he's saying, وَفِيهِ نَظْرٌ فَالْخِلَافُ مَوْجُودٌ ومن متوقف ومن قائل بالقبول مطلقا وهو اختيار ابن السبكي تبعا لأبي المظفر السمعاني. So in light of all of this here that we explained, Allama Laqani rahmallah says, نعم نقل المصنف في شرح البخاري عن جمهور المحدثين في مسألة الجحد قبول الحديث لجزم الراوي وحمل ما قاله الشيخ على النسيان وعليه فهما مسألتان مختلفان. So وعليه فهما مسألتان مختلفان means that the first example which he gave كذب عليه is a different مسألة. In that case, everyone agrees that you will reject the narration. But the second one, when the Sheikh positively says, and with conviction he says, Ma rawaytu hadha, that is a different mas'ala. And in that mas'ala, the correct way of saying it is that we will make tawaqquf, and we will then look for external factors, whether we can accept the narration or whether we can reject the narration. So all this was with regards to the Sheikh knowing or being sure that he did not narrate it. Now Ibn Hajar rahmallah moves to the second category. And this is where the Sheikh merely doubts on whether he narrated. So he's not convinced that he did not narrate, but he is just doubtful. He has reservations. He can't accept that he narrated it, but he's not saying that he did not narrate it. So Ibn Hajar rahmallah says, أو كان جحده احتمالا, that maybe his rejection is just doubtful. Like he says, ما أذكر هذا, I cannot recall narrating this. ولا أعرفه, I don't even know this narration. Now here you need to understand that irrespective of how pious a person is, or what a good memory a person has, he can still forget. Every human being can forget. So النسيان غير مأمون على الإنسان, that every human being will forget. أول الناس أول ناس. So every person will forget. Even if the Sheikh could be an Imam of his time, he could still forget. So in this case, if the Sheikh is just maybe doubtful, he's not very sure if he narrated it or not, now the ruling is totally different. In the previous case, in Nuzha, Ibn Hajar rahmallah said that رُدَّ ذَلِكَ الْخَبْرُ. But here for this, if the Sheikh is doubtful, what he says, قُبِلَ ذَلِكَ الْحَدِيثُ فِي الْأَصَحِ. He's saying that the narration will be accepted. And Mullah al-Qari rahmallah says, وَهُوَ مَذْهَبُ جُمْهُورِ أَهْلِ الْحَدِيثِ وَأَكْثَرِ الْفُقَهَاءِ وَالْمُتَكَلِّمِينَ. That this is also the view of the vast majority of muhaddithin and also the majority of fuqaha and mutakallimin, that now they will say you will accept the narration. So saying asah, this here shows that there are those who hold a different opinion, and Ibn Hajar will mention it with the word qil shortly. So he's saying, why will you accept it? لأن ذلك يحمل على نسيان الشيخ, because that will mean that the Sheikh forgot. So one time forgetting, one time making a mistake, we have discussed this here previously, and we gave numerous quotations of it also, that if it's very seldom, then it's just because he's a human being, he made a mistake, because he's a human being, he forgot, and therefore his adalat will still remain, his trustworthiness will still remain, and you will not accuse him of having a weak memory. So if the Sheikh forgot and the student who is a thiqah remembers, then it makes sense that we accept what the student says, because he remembered. وَالْحُكْمُ لِلذَّاكِرِ إِذِ الْمُثْبِتِ الْجَازِمُ مُقَدَّمٌ عَلَى النَّافِلِ الْمُتَرَدِّدِ. So this here is the preferred ruling which Ibn Hajar rahmallah takes. Now again, if you want to phrase this whole thing differently, so you know now this here is putting a whole different dimension and phrasing it all differently. You could say that if it's you don't even have to divide this this whole chapter into two. That either the Sheikh is absolutely sure that he did not narrate, or he is just doubtful. Rather, for both you can give the same ruling. You can just say that if the Sheikh denies that he narrated the narration, then you will make tawaqquf and you will look for external factors. One external factor is that you will look at, is the Sheikh maybe just doubtful, or is he very certain? If he's doubtful, then it tells the scale that you can accept the narration. So it's just a different way of phrasing it. Because in this case here, now you are accepting it. Why? Because the Sheikh forgot and the student remembered. After mentioning this preferred opinion, Hafiz ibn Hajar rahmallah now mentions other opinions in this regard. So he says, وَقِيل لَا يُقْبَلْ, that according to some scholars, you will not accept the narration. So who are these scholars? Mullah al-Qari rahmallah, who is a Hanafi, he said, al-Qa'ilu bihi ba'du ashabi Abi Hanifa, that there are some Hanafi scholars who said that no, even if the Shaykh is doubtful, then too you will not accept the narration. But he mentioned ba'du, so it is just a handful, very few Hanafis. It's not the view of all the Hanafis. Again, we go to Kashf al-Sarar, وَأَمَّا فِي الْوَجْهِ الثَّانِي فَقَدْ اخْتُلِفَ فِيهِ. Now he mentions the names. فَذَهَبَ الشيخ أبو الحسن الكرخي وجماعة من أصحابنا وأحمد بن حنبل في رواية عنه إلى أن العمل يسقط به كما في الوجه الأول. So here he mentions وهو مختار القاضي إمام والشيخين وبعض المتكلمين. So he's mentioning that this is also one view of Imam Ahmad rahimahullah, and it's the view of the very earlier Imams of the Madhab, that they say that you will not practice upon it. Now what's the reasoning that is given? Why should you not practice upon it? لأن الفرع تبع للأصل في إثبات الحديث. They claim that the teacher is the source and the student, he is getting it from the source. So if the source does not know about the narration, then the one who is obtaining it and getting it from the source, his statement will fall away. To put it in better wording, the peripheral. So therefore, it will mean that since the Sheikh, who is now regarded as the core, if he does not know about it, then the peripheral, who is the student, his view will also then fall away. بحيث إذا أثبت الأصل الحديث ثبتت رواية الفرع. You can say it as ثبتت, that means, or you can say it as ثبتت رواية الفرع, and the إعراب رواية والدفع. So he's saying that if the reporting of the peripheral can only be established if the core affirms the narration, that the only way the student can get the narration is if the asal and the sheikh remembers of the narration. وكذلك ينبغي أن يكون فرعا عليه وتبعا له في التحقيق في النفي. So the same will apply to rejecting the narration. So this is the argument which is given on why you should not practice upon, or why you cannot accept the narration. But Ibn Hajar rahmallah refutes this by saying وَهَذَا مُتَعَقِّبٌ. Why? فَإِنَّ عَدَالَةَ الْفَرْعِ تَقْتَضِي صِدْقُهُ. For the student to be reliable, it would mean that number one, he is truthful, and also he needs to have a good memory. Then only you can say that he is thiqa, he is an adil. So he has to be trustworthy, to be adil, and he has to also be have a good memory, so that you can call him thiqa. وَعَدَمُ عِلْمِ الْأَصْلِ لَا يُنَافِيهِ. So the lack of knowledge, or rather we can say that the forgetfulness of the sheikh, this here cannot contradict the trustworthiness and a good memory of the student. فَالْمُثْبِتْ مُقَدَّمٌ عَلَى النَّافِي. So the one who is affirming will get preference over the one who is negating. Affirmation is preceded over negation. Now on this here, Allama Qasim remarked that affirmation, this whole portion, bringing ithbat, muthbit, all these words, all this, إذا أثبت الأصل, all these words, أثبت, muthbit, all this is actually for the previous scenario. Here, this has nothing to do with affirmation. It doesn't apply to this case, because here the sheikh, or nafi, etc., nafi, all this refers to the previous scenario, not to this case here. So he's saying ليس بجيد لأن هذا في مسألة تكذيب الأصل جزما. الأصل نافٍ والفرع مثبت. All these kind of words you bring it in the previous scenario. It doesn't apply to this. وليس الحكم فيها للمثبت. فالحق أن يقول. You see here you can use wordings as thing لأن المحقق. So مقدم على المظنون. Because here it's the one is just mentioning it that this here is the reality, and the other one is doubting. So rather, this is the type of wording that you should use instead of using these words here of ithbat and nafi, because this applies to the previous, where the one is trying to establish it and the other one is negating it. Here is the one is just making tahqiq of it, while the other one is doubting upon it. وَالْجَزْمُ مُقَدَّمٌ عَلَى التَّرْدِيد. So that is what Allama Qasim rahimahullah remarked here. But Mullah al-Qari rahmallah said that you may simply make this interpretation, يعني المثبت الجازم مقدم على النافي المتردد. So this is how you could make a small interpretation. But Allama Baqai rahimahullah, he also mentioned something similar to what Allama Qasim said. He said, الصواب أن يقول على التردد, that these are the type of wordings that Ibn Hajar needed to be using here. Taraddud, dhan, etc. Not the nafi, because there's no nafi taking place. So Allama al-Qani rahimahullah said that the best answer is to just understand that Ibn Hajar rahimahullah mentioned this here majazan. He mentioned it metaphorically. وَيُمْكِنُ الدَّفْعُ بِالتَّجَوُّزِ وَهُوَ جَيِّد. That's the best answer to give. So this is what they are saying. They're saying that if the sheikh doesn't know it, then how can the student know it? But Ibn Hajar rahimahullah gives the response to it. Now Ibn Hajar rahimahullah responds to another ruling on which they could make qiyas. So this here is qiyas on testimony. If the original witness has to express doubt in court, then the testimony of the witnesses will also be doubtful. That means this is shahada ala shahada. So Ibn Hajar rahimahullah explains with regard to this here. وَأَمَّا قِيَاسُ ذَلِكَ بِالشَّهَادَةِ. So just like how there, because the asal is making, the original witness is expressing doubt, now no one, to understand it for our context here, although in fact there's much more to it, but for our context, the representative of the shahid. So maybe say he couldn't go to court and now he sent someone else to court, but he himself is doubting. So his representative will also then, it will, whatever he says will fall away. So in the same case, the same will apply here. So you say, وأما قياس ذلك على الشهادة أي على الشهادة بأن تكذيب الأصل للفرع جرح للفرع في الشهادة فكذا في الرواية. So just say as the one witness is now mentioning that he cannot recall, then in that case it will mean that the person who is now becoming his representative, that person, he also cannot say it. He cannot also go and give witness in court. So making qiyas like this here is a fasid. Ibn Hajar said that this here is qiyas fasid لأنه قياس مع الفارق, because the two mas'alas are not the same. Now Ibn Hajar rahmallah is just mentioning this without any prior argument. He didn't mention that some people will say this or they will bring this here as a proof. He just mentioned this answer. So he didn't mention any prior question or any argument that is presented. And therefore, Allama Qasim rahmallah said, ظاهر جواب سؤال مقدر. This here is the answer of a hidden question. The question is not mentioned, but the answer is being given. So جواب سؤال مقدر بالفارق وهو لا يؤثر حتى يكون واردا على العلة الجامعة وهنا ليس كذلك. So this here is now a very technical thing, that since it is qiyas since the question is not mentioned, now to give this kind of an answer will not be correct. Nevertheless, even assuming that this kind of a question was brought then to its qiyas ma'al fariq. Now why it's qiyas ma'al fariq? Why will this qiyas be invalid? So to explain the differences between the two cases, Ibn Hajar rahmallah says, لأن شهادة الفرع لا تسمع مع القدرة على شهادة الأصل. So this here is the very first difference, that a person cannot appoint a representative if he does not have a valid excuse. Yes, now if he's out of the country, or for our context, now he's isolating, maybe he got COVID, so now he cannot come to court, or maybe some valid reason he is, then only he can appoint a representative. But if he can, he's 100% well, he's going to shopping, malls, he's going work, he's going out everywhere, then he must come to court. He cannot now appoint someone else to come. So this here is the accepted ruling, ittifaqan. Mullah al-Qari rahmallah mentions according to ittifaq, that if he can make it himself, then he cannot let someone else come. But this is in contrast to a riwayah. Why? فإنما تقبل مع القدرة على رواية الشيخ وهو الأصل رواية التلميذ وهو الفرع اتفاقا. If your sheikh is still alive, not even still alive, he could be your neighbor in your same town, going to the same masjid also. And if he can narrate the hadith, absolutely he can narrate the hadith, then it's also fine for you to also narrate the hadith. So it's not the same like shahada. There are differences between riwayah and shahada. In the muqaddimah of Sahih Muslim, you remember the similarities between riwayah and shahada. So there are many similarities between riwayah and shahada, but there are also many differences between riwayah and shahada. And therefore, Alama Munawi rahimahullah, he mentions here that there are so many differences which you could see between shahada and riwayah. وأجاب أهل الأصول بأن باب الشهادة أضيق, that the chapter of shahada, of going to court and giving testimony, is much more stringent, is much more confined compared to riwayah. لاعتبارهم فيه الحرية والعدالة والذكورة وغيرهما. So there's so many differences also between riwayah and shahada, and therefore you cannot really make a qiyas between shahada and you cannot make qiyas with the riwayah on shahada in all circumstances. Although in other chapters, when it suits well, then they do make qiyas with shahada. But nevertheless, in this case, he's showing the difference. So you can remember this here, and you can use this here as ammunition to quote in those places when they want to make qiyas on shahada. Ibn Hajar rahimahullah mentions, وَفِيهِ أي في هذا النوع صنف الدارقطني كتاب من حدث ونسي. It with regards to this here on the chapter, Imam Darqutni rahimahullah wrote the book من حدث ونسي. And Allama Suyuti rahimahullah, he condensed this book and he gave it the title تذكرة المؤتزم في من حدث ونسي. So this book here is published and circulated by various different publishers, and it's a book which is very easy to get. Now he mentions وفيه ما يدل على تقوية المذهب الصحيح. Now that there is something to prove why you should be able to accept. That what strengthens this view? The two views which I mentioned above. The one is that you can accept, and the one is that you will have to reject if the Sheikh is doubtful on whether he narrated it. So he's saying what strengthens our point that you can accept it. So what strengthens it? لكون كثير منهم حدثوا بأحاديث. He said when we go through the books of ahadith, we find so many students continuing to narrate the ahadith from their teachers. فلما عرضت عليهم لم يتذكروها. Even though when those narrations were presented to the teachers, the teachers could not remember, but the students continued to narrate it. أي ما أنكروها بل ترددوا فيها. So Mullah al-Qari just clarifies here that they didn't reject it, they just were doubtful. They could not recall whether they narrated it or not. لكنهم لاعتمادهم على الرواة عنهم. But because they had so much conviction and trust in those who were narrating from them, من جهة العدالة والضبط باعتبار حسن الظن الغالب عليهم, because they had so much اعتماد and trust on these students, صاروا يروونها عن الذين رووها عنهم. Not only would they say it's fine for the student to narrate these hadiths from me, rather they would then narrate the hadith from the student. So they would narrate it from the student, claiming that the student is narrating it from me. So this here becomes a nazil because now it's two additional links. But the point is to show you that they had so much, they were so free to accept these types of narrations. They were not hesitant at all, even though they could not recall the narration, but they would narrate it from that student because they would understand that the student is the one who is correct. So he gives an example of a narration which comes in Sunan Abi Dawud. كحديث سهيل بن أبي صالح عن أبيه عن أبي هريرة. So Suhail is narrating from his father. Abu Salih was narrating from Abu Huraira, the قصة الشاهد واليمين. And this here is where أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قضى بالشاهد واليمين. You have to bring two witnesses, but when there was only one witness, then Nabi صلى الله عليه وسلم sufficed on an oath, and therefore he gave judgment according to that. وبهذا أخذ الشافعي أنه إذا كان للمدعي شاهد واحد, if he has only one person to give witness, then يحلف المدعي, then he can also, because generally it is that the person who is the mudda'i, he has to bring witnesses. And now وَالْيَمِينُ عَلَى مَنْ أَنْكَرَ, and the person who is rejecting it, he has to give take an oath. But here Imam Shafi'i rahimahullah, he accepted this narration. So Abdul Aziz ibn Muhammad al-Darawardi, he says that Rabi'at ibn Abi Abdurrahman, he narrated this narration to me. He's famously known as Rabi'atur al-Rai. He's the teacher of Imam Malik rahimahullah. So he is a very trustworthy person, and there are also some fabrications against him. It's not the time to discuss it. Some nice, juicy stories which are quoted from him, which are not correct. Maybe you must have heard of it. You can then research those stories. So nevertheless, he narrated from Suhail. So thereafter he says that I met Suhail and I asked it. But Suhail said that, no, I don't know the Falam Ya'arifu. So he didn't know about this narration. So it's not that he rejected the narration. It's just that he was doubtful. He didn't know. He was unaware. So then I told Suhail, but how come you don't know this narration? In Rabi'a, حدثني عنك بكذا. Saying that Rabi'a told me that you narrated this narration to them. So now how are you saying now that you do not recall this narration? So Suhail, he had so much trust on Rabi'a ibn Abi Abdurrahman, that after that he would say, حدثني ربيعة عني. Rabi'a narrated from me, that I narrated to him. So can you see how he would phrase it? Now here Allama Qasim rahimahullah mentions that in kana هذا لفظ القصة من غير تصرف فكان حق سهيل أن يقول. If Ibn Hajar rahimahullah objective here was to explain the full incident without changing it, then he ought to quote verbatim what comes in Sunan Abi Dawud. So then he would have to say it like this here: حدثني الدراوردي عن ربيعة أني حدثته عن أبي. That is how he would have to say it. والظاهر أن فيه تصرفا. So Mullah al-Qari responded and said that yes, Ibn Hajar rahimahullah is not now here mentioning verbatim what is being quoted, rather he's just quoting. So he's saying, والأصل فلقي سهيل ربيعة وذكر أنه حدثهم, etc. So Ibn Hajar rahimahullah is saying, وَنَظَائِرُهُ كَثِيرًا. You will find so many examples like this here, where the Shaykh was doubtful on whether he narrated it, but because looking at the strength of the student, he would say, okay, I narrated it. ويدل عليه قوله لكونه كثير منهم, because many of them would do this here. So there are so many incidents. If you have to go to Al-Muhaddith Al-Fasil, likewise Allama Khatib rahimahullah brought a dedicated chapter of it, and a few examples in Al-Kifaya, etc. So the summary of all this is that Ibn Hajar rahimahullah divided it into two categories here in Nuzha an-Naḍar. The Shaykh is denying with absolute conviction that he did not narrate, and the Shaykh is doubtful on whether he narrated or not. But in Fathul Bari, he is putting it into three categories. The one is where the Shaykh is accusing the student of lying. Then only in that case he's saying that it will be rejected. If the Shaykh, whether he is doubtful or whether even if he is convinced, but he's not accusing this student of lying, then we will be able to accept the narration. But we have said that you will have to evaluate every narration independently, and you will have to then see whether there are reasons that we could accept the narration or whether there are reasons that we can reject the narration. And this is how you will have to do it. So there's no hard and fast rule. Rather, every narration you will have to inspect. And therefore, in Shaykh Awama, he mentions with regards to this here, والكلام في هذه المسألة وما يترتب عليها من مسائل أصولية وفروع فقهية متشعب جدا. So then these words you must memorize of Shaykh Awama. وأنا أعتقد والله أعلم أن البت فيها وترجيح أحد المذهبين متوقف على البت في فروعها الفقهية ولا يتم هذا إلا ببحث شمولي في أدلة الطرفين لكل فرع. That if I want to tell you now what's the Hanafi ruling, I cannot just look at, go to the usul books of the Hanafi madhab and tell you what the Hanafi ruling is. Rather, I will have to look at how they applied the rulings, and then I will be able to derive. So he's saying that ولا يتم هذا إلا ببحث شمولي في أدلة الطرفين لكل فرع. You need to go, if you want to attribute a view to the Shafi'is, you need to go through the books of the Shafi'i madhab and look at how in all these kind, when the basis of a particular verdict is a narration in which the Shaykh is rejecting it or the Shaykh is doubtful about it, did the Shafi'is accept it or not? So in the same way, you will have to do the same for the Hanafi madhab. You will have to look that, okay, we only have this one hadith. There are no other proofs. Now, these kind of fuqaha are citing this narration as a proof. So now we will understand that, and this also shows you the importance of the dalail which Allama Marghinani rahmallah presents in Hidayah, etc. This is another whole subject, understanding that his Mujtahid fil Masail, when he presents a dalil, that dalil holds a lot of status within the Hanafi madhab, and from those dalail that he presented, you derive usul. So it's not this point which Sheikh Awama is explaining. It's not that you have usul first and then you look whether the fuqaha are confirming with the usul. Rather, just like how it is in hadith, first the fuqaha applied the usul. Now we will have to look at we will have to look at their application, and from their application we will be able to know what is the preferred view. But for now, we just understand the ruling to be that for both, we as long as the sheikh is not saying that the student is lying, we will just take it that you will need to look at external factors. So we will put the hadith on hold, and now we will look, can we accept this narration or can we reject this narration? If we don't find anything, then we will continue keeping that narration on hold. So alhamdulillah, we completed lesson 124 and 125. So now we have 10 more lessons, inshallah. So we'll to complete this kitab before the end of this year. Until Thursday, jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum.